Santiago observed the demolition machine gearing up to obliterate the old cabin, one of the numerous structures he had acquired to revitalize his property. To him, it was merely another insignificant structure on an unending roster of duties. Yet, as the machine bellowed, a silhouette appeared from the quaint wooden dwelling. A woman clad in tattered garments stood, her face etched with the struggles of time, cradling a tiny form in her arms. Santiago stood still, caught in a moment of disbelief. The child cradled in that woman's arms gazed at him not just with curiosity, but with a visage that felt unsettlingly familiar. A pressure built within his chest. "I implore you, don't go through with it," the woman exclaimed, embracing the child fervently. Santiago drew near, his heart pounding with an unexplainable urgency. A flicker of uncertainty flared in the recesses of his thoughts. What made him feel as though he recognized that child? What is it about this sensation of threat? Something felt amiss, and the reality was on the verge of unraveling him. The clamor of heavy machinery reverberated across the landscape, a persistent drone that infused the sweltering midday atmosphere with dust. Santiago leaned against his truck, observing the workers as they readied themselves for the demolition. The cabin, worn down by the passage of time and a lack of care, appeared poised to fall apart at any moment. The passage of time had not favored that quaint wooden building, and in his thoughts, it was merely another burdensome asset that ought to be disposed of. "Mr. Santiago, are we giving the order?" one of the workers inquired, gripping his helmet with impatience. Santiago nodded, lost in thought. On that particular day, his thoughts, typically sharp and directed towards business, drifted without purpose. Perhaps it was merely a habit, or perhaps there was something more profound at play. Ever since Miguel vanished 4 years ago, her life had taken a turn into the unfamiliar. Isabella, his spouse, had suggested that it was time to let go, yet every nook of his residence echoed with memories of his child. The existence he had crafted felt hollow in the absence of his joyful resonance. The clamor of machinery pulled him from his reverie. The excavator's blade ascended, poised to descend upon the delicate structure, when unexpectedly, a door flew open. A woman burst forth from the cabin, her arms flailing wildly in a desperate attempt to capture attention. "Oh, come on!" he cried out, his voice trembling and fractured. A small boy with light brown hair nestled against her neck, holding on tightly. Santiago was frozen in fear. Something about that boy struck him like a blow to the gut. The excavator came to an abrupt stop, grinding to a halt, as the workers shared puzzled glances. The woman, her eyes brimming with despair, stood before the cabin like a sentinel of sorrow. "Our home is invincible," he exclaimed, gazing intently at Santiago. The businessman approached her with purposeful strides, his thoughts racing as he sought clarity. Who was that lady? The cabin showed no signs of ever being occupied. The whole expanse had been acquired on the understanding that it was deserted. "Who might you be?" he inquired, his voice taut. His eyes were drawn to the boy, as if by an unseen force. The young child gazed up at him with wide, inquisitive eyes, and a disquieting sensation took root in Santiago's chest. "I am Clara, sir," the woman replied, her voice laced with both trepidation and a hint of rebellion. "Kindly refrain from causing any damage to our home. We find ourselves without a destination." "This property is mine," Santiago asserted, his voice steady, though a flicker of uncertainty began to creep into his thoughts. "I had no idea anyone resided in this place. This territory was marketed as forsaken." Clara took a deep breath, tightening her hold on the boy. The young child, unaware of the turmoil surrounding him, held tightly to a frayed cloth toy, gazing at Santiago's expression as if attempting to unravel a mystery. That boy, Santiago pondered, possessed an unsettling familiarity. "We came here a few months back," Clara recounted, her voice trembling. "We found ourselves without a destination. I discovered this child alone on the street, left behind. I just couldn't abandon him. Were you able to locate it?" Santiago sensed his heart racing. The sensation of recognition washed over him once more, this time with greater intensity. What was your impression of it? He was alone, with no one to claim him, Clara said, her voice trembling as tears welled in her eyes. I nurtured him as though he were a part of my own family. No one was searching for you, sir, no one at all. Santiago squinted, advancing a step closer. The young lad gazed upward, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though time had come to a standstill. In those eyes, there was a depth that pulled him into the echoes of the past, reminding him of Miguel, his beloved little boy who was no longer with him. The rhythm of his heartbeat resonated within his ears. What is the age of the child? He inquired, his voice rougher than he had meant it to be. Clara paused, contemplating her response. For years, she whispered, for years, precisely the age Miguel would be at this moment. Santiago sensed the earth beneath him start to tremble. His breath quickened, and a wave of dizziness washed over him. Share with me, Clara, he murmured, leaning in slightly. Where did you come across it? Clara glanced at the boy, then shifted her gaze to Santiago. His eyes were a tumultuous blend of fear and guilt. I discovered it close to a park, nearly 2 years back. He appeared utterly desolate, as though he had been abandoned with no hope of being rescued. Santiago tightened his fists. 24 months. How could it be that no one had mentioned a child who fit his son's description so flawlessly? The child started to articulate his words, struggling to express himself. Have you reported him to the authorities? Did you submit your report? Clara gently shook her head, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes. I attempted initially, but alas, my words fell on deaf ears. I lacked any evidence. She was merely a destitute woman with a child that remained unacknowledged by anyone. Santiago experienced a tumultuous surge of conflicting feelings. Shock, frustration, optimism. Is it feasible? Is it possible that this child is truly Miguel? Uncertainty plagued his mind, yet a fragment of his heart had already chosen its path. This child, he remarked with a stern tone, might very well be my son. Clara stared at him in disbelief, her mouth agape, words escaping her. The young lad, unaware of the gravity of the discussion, fidgeted with the edge of his shirt, softly humming a playful tune. At that moment, Santiago understood he was on the verge of crossing an irrevocable threshold. I will uncover the truth, he declared, his eyes locked onto Clara. And if this child is indeed my son, I will pursue every avenue until I reclaim him. Clara found herself immobilized by Santiago's words. His lips quivered, yet he found himself unable to reply right away. It felt as though her deepest anxieties were unfolding before her very eyes. Over the years, she had been haunted by the fear that the boy's past would eventually catch up with her. Though she never knew his true lineage, the mere thought of his real father potentially claiming him left her feeling exposed and defenseless. The child of his blood. He ultimately succeeded in expressing himself, albeit in a faint voice. What gives you such confidence? Santiago moved in a fraction nearer to her, his gaze unwaveringly fixed on the boy. Every detail of that little boy, from the hue of his hair to the contour of his eyes, resonated with the faint recollections he held of Miguel. Even as time flowed on, Santiago held the image of his son close, cherishing it like a precious gem within the recesses of his thoughts. Not a single day passed without thoughts of him occupying my mind. He's the same age, he remarked, his voice gravelly, and he bears a striking resemblance to my son. Miguel vanished 4 years back, he was just 2 at the time of his disappearance, and you claim to have discovered this child 2 years ago. Can't you perceive it? All pieces align perfectly. Clara held the child tightly against her, a palpable fear coursing through her that someone might take him from her grasp at any instant. He sensed the gravity of Santiago's words, yet he struggled to envision how he would react if that child, whom he now regarded as his own, turned out to be the offspring of this affluent man. Doubt and trepidation started to creep into his thoughts. Sir, he started, striving to keep his composure. "I had no idea, I simply discovered him and couldn't abandon him. He was incredibly tiny and utterly defenseless. I didn't take him away from anyone." Santiago shut his eyes briefly, grappling with the tempest of feelings swirling within him. Amidst the turmoil, a flicker of hope ignited within me, a sensation long absent from my life. Yet, concurrently, I was engulfed by a tempest of doubt, fear, and anger. The idea of his son roaming alone, without anyone to truly look after him, ignited a deep, chilling anger within him. How did he arrive at that moment? "I'm not saying you took it," Santiago said, inhaling deeply, "but if this child is indeed my son, I have a right to know. I have endured 4 long years without him, 4 years of uncertainty about his whereabouts, of existing in torment. You can't fathom what that feels like." Clara cast her gaze downward, grasping the depth of the hurt woven into Santiago's words. She understood his intentions were pure, yet the dread of losing the child overwhelmed her. She had come to cherish him as if he were her own, and even though she couldn't match Santiago's strength and means, she refused to let him slip away without a struggle. "And what will you do if it turns out to be your child?" he inquired softly. "I have nurtured him over these past few years. He remains unaware of the challenges I've faced, yet I have approached it all with unwavering devotion." Santiago's brow furrowed, a tempest of feelings swirling within him. He was reluctant to inflict any cruelty upon Clara. He understood she wasn't at fault for the events that transpired, yet the very idea that another had been nurturing his son stirred a deep resentment within him. "I'm not sure," he replied candidly, "but I must uncover the truth. I require evidence. This situation cannot remain unresolved." Clara nodded slowly, her silence conveying all that needed to be said. She understood that Santiago would persist, and the reality was that she didn't wish for the boy to exist under the weight of a falsehood either. If there existed an opportunity for that child to experience the warmth of a genuine family that would cherish him, he knew he had to act with integrity. The quiet that enveloped them was gently broken by the boy's soft voice, finally breaking his silence after observing the entire conversation unfold. "Mother?" he inquired with a touch of naivety, gazing at Clara. "What's troubling you?" Clara experienced a tightness in her throat upon hearing those words. For the past 2 years, he had referred to her as Mom, a title she had earned in his life. Even though she was aware that this day might arrive, she had never steeled herself for the anguish of his absence. "Everything is all right, my dear," Clara murmured, gently caressing her hair. "There's no need to fret." Santiago observed the unfolding scene quietly. The gentle care Clara showed the boy touched him deeply, stirring emotions he had not anticipated. He couldn't ignore the fact that she had done well in looking after him, but that didn't alter the situation. If that child was Miguel, he was entitled to reclaim him. "I will proceed with a DNA test," Santiago finally declared, shattering the stillness, "that will provide us with the answers we seek." Clara paused for a moment, but then slowly nodded in agreement. He understood that he couldn't prevent Santiago from pursuing the truth, and beneath it all, he too felt an urge to uncover the true identity of that boy. Her only desire was for his happiness, and if that required setting him free, she would have to come to terms with it, regardless of the pain it caused her. "All right," Clara whispered, "if that's what you must do, then go ahead. However, I urge you to exercise caution. This young man is completely unaware of his history. Please, don't harm him," Santiago said with a nod. Regardless of his emotions, he had no desire to harm the boy. He merely sought the truth, aiming to start mending the scars that had plagued him for an eternity. "I assure you," he spoke gently, "I won't harm him." Clara observed him for a prolonged moment before her gaze shifted back to the boy, who was lost in thought as he fiddled with his toy. In that instant, they both understood that the little boy's fate was on the brink of transformation, and no vow could shield them from the impending sorrow. As Santiago pivoted to plan his next moves, one undeniable truth lingered in his thoughts. If that child was Miguel, nothing would deter him from his quest to reclaim him, even if it meant shattering Clara's heart along the way. The days that followed enveloped Santiago in a dense, lingering haze. Each passing minute, devoid of a clear resolution regarding the child, felt like an agonizing ordeal. Despite the weariness that had enveloped him since Miguel's disappearance, this newfound revelation plunged him back into a realm of anxiety and uncertainty, reminiscent of the tumultuous days following his son's vanishing. The thought that this small child might be Miguel stirred a hope within him, one he hesitated to fully accept, yet it also filled him with a deep sense of fear. He had consulted with his attorney and had already initiated the process for the DNA test. The journey ahead would span several days, yet Santiago found himself gripped by an unsettling anticipation of what lay in store. What actions would he take if it truly were his son, and what if it turned out not to be? The very idea of confronting that destruction once more left him feeling fragile. Isabella, for her part, observed the shift in her husband, yet appeared reluctant to confront the matter head-on. Perhaps she believed that Santiago was merely grappling with her own suffering, the same anguish she had skillfully concealed beneath a facade of flawlessness. Ultimately, for Isabella, the way things looked had always taken precedence. One afternoon, as Santiago strolled through the gardens of his estate, lost in contemplation, he received a call. "Mr. Santiago, we have received the results of the DNA test," came the voice of his lawyer from the other end of the line. Santiago felt a sudden jolt in his chest. He froze in place, grappling with the weight of the words that had just reached his ears. For a fleeting instant, the dread of uncovering the truth immobilized him, yet he understood that evasion was no longer an option. "And," he inquired, his tone more resolute than he anticipated, "what do the findings indicate?" A stillness lingered on the other end of the line, a silence that hinted at the weight of an impending revelation. Santiago could feel the beads of sweat trickling down the nape of his neck. His breath quickened. "My dear sir, the young lad is indeed your offspring. The findings are definitive. The name of that boy is Miguel." Santiago experienced a fleeting sensation where the world around him seemed to dissolve into nothingness. The confirmation, while anticipated, washed over him in a surge of feelings. Miguel existed in the realm of the living. His son was still living. Yet, concurrently, that truth bore an excruciating burden. All the years I had lost, the smiles, the first words, the shared experiences, each one had been stripped away from me. "Thank you," Santiago replied, his voice scarcely above a whisper. He ended the call and remained still, attempting to grasp the weight of the revelation he had just received. Miguel was alive, yet he now stood at the precipice of a new journey, one that demanded he reclaim his son. How could he convey all this to Clara, the woman who had nurtured his son as if he were her own? How could she take Miguel without utterly shattering her existence? He realized he must return to the cabin and have a conversation with Clara. He was unable to delay what was bound to happen. Upon the arrival of the petite wooden structure, it appeared as delicate as always. Yet for Santiago, it had come to symbolize something far more profound. It was the location where his son had endured, safeguarded by a woman who, despite her lack of wealth, had bestowed upon him more affection than he could have ever envisioned. Clara rushed to the Porsche the moment she heard the engine roar, her expression tight with anticipation, as if she sensed he carried news she wasn't sure she was prepared to receive. Santiago started with a voice laced with unease. "Are you already aware of something?" Santiago nodded slowly, observing Clara as she leaned against the door frame, her posture suggesting a fear of unraveling with his next words. "Indeed, I possess the results," he remarked, taking a moment to gaze into her eyes. "It belongs to my son. Miguel is my child." Clara shut her eyes tightly, as if the weight of reality was more than she could endure. "During all those years, I made an effort to avoid envisioning this moment. I was aware it could happen, yet in my heart, I had always wished it wouldn't. At last, the thing he dreaded most had become a reality. The child did not belong to him. I sensed it, it was evident in his gaze. From the instant you shared the news about your son, I sensed it, yet I hesitated to acknowledge it. Santiago moved closer, uncertain of how to offer her comfort. He understood that any words he uttered at that moment would sound hollow, that nothing could alleviate the anguish Clara was experiencing. He was engulfed by guilt. Clara had stepped into the role of mother for Miguel when he was unable to fulfill that duty, and now she was preparing to do the same for him, Santiago said, his voice heavy with feeling. I can't fathom how we would have managed without you, but now I must take him. Miguel must accompany me home. Clara nodded faintly, brushing the tears away from her cheeks. I anticipated this moment arriving, yet I was unprepared for the profound impact it would have. I comprehend, she uttered, her voice trembling. I understand, but he perceives me as a maternal figure. I'm not sure how you'll grasp this. I wish for him to find peace. Santiago let out a deep sigh. Clara was indeed correct. She couldn't simply enter Miguel's world and rip him away from the sole maternal presence he had ever experienced. Even though his parental instincts urged him to act without delay, he understood the importance of handling the situation correctly, prioritizing the child's well-being. We will approach this step by step, as it could be overwhelming for him. However, Clara, in time, he must understand who I am and who you are. Clara nodded once more, though each word felt like a small fracture in her heart. He understood that he was drifting away from his son, yet he realized that he could no longer keep him tethered. Miguel had every right to know his father. I understand, he whispered. Simply allow it some time, if you would. It was a blend of demeanor and melancholy all at once. He understood that the bond Clara had formed with Miguel wouldn't disintegrate in an instant, yet now it was his moment to reclaim his son, to step into the role of the father he had been unable to embody for so long. Santiago assured, I will provide you with all the time you require. I desire nothing but the finest for him. In the stillness of the moment, as they observed the child immersed in innocent play, an unspoken understanding settled between them. The journey ahead loomed long and fraught with challenges, yet it shimmered with the promise of untold possibilities. The subsequent days unfolded in a tumult of conflicting feelings for Santiago and Clara. As Santiago endeavored to keep his calm, fully aware that each moment with his son required a gentle touch, Clara grappled with the profound affection she held for Miguel and the painful realization that their time together was drawing to a close. They were acutely aware of their predicament, with Miguel's future hanging in the balance, and each move felt precarious, as if treading on fragile ice. One afternoon, Santiago chose to pay Clara a visit to engage in a more serious discussion regarding Miguel's future. He had skillfully sidestepped the conversation during those days, yet he was acutely aware that the circumstances could not persist indefinitely. Upon his arrival at the quaint cabin, Clara occupied the modest wooden table in the dining room, her gaze lost in thought as she stared out the window. Miguel sat on the floor, immersed in a realm of imagination as he manipulated the wooden blocks, completely unaware of the underlying tensions that enveloped him. Santiago, Clara remarked, rising as she noticed his arrival, I was just about to brew some tea. Would you care for some? I appreciate it, Clara, but today I would rather discuss a different topic, Santiago replied gently. I understood that the discussion would be challenging, and I was eager to address it without further postponement. Clara nodded thoughtfully and settled back into her seat, her hands resting together on the table. Santiago positioned himself before her, searching for the perfect words to initiate the conversation. I've been reflecting deeply over the past few days, Santiago started, gazing into her eyes, about Miguel and you. Clara fidgeted with her hands, a wave of anxiety washing over her. His heart still needed time to prepare. I understand your desire to take him, she said softly, her voice tinged with resignation. He is your son, and I get that. Yet, I am acutely aware that this journey will be challenging for him. I can't simply disappear from his life overnight. Santiago nodded, acknowledging the weight of Clara's insight. He had reached that conclusion on his own. He couldn't simply intrude into Miguel's life and take him away. While he had the legal right to do so, the emotional complexities of the situation were far more intricate. "You're right," he conceded, "I can't make it happen. Miguel loves you. You are the only mother he has ever known, and I don't want to cause him pain, but I also need him to grasp the truth, to understand my identity, and ultimately to learn the reality. I understand that I'm not his biological mother, but I've been there for him all along. I'm anxious that when he learns the truth, our relationship will change." Santiago experienced a sharp twinge of guilt. Clara had become the center of Miguel's world in recent years, and he struggled with the weight of that truth. "Clara," he murmured gently, "I can't bear the thought of you vanishing from Miguel's life. You have been his mother all along. What I suggest is not a complete departure from it, but rather a gradual transition. I need Miguel to truly know me and, with time, to grasp the reality and the essence of the situation." He understood that Santiago's intentions were not harmful, yet that did not diminish the anguish he experienced at the prospect of losing his little one. "What do you suggest then?" he inquired, gently brushing away a tear that had quietly traced its way down her cheek. Santiago exhaled deeply, casting a glance at Miguel before responding, "He will come to understand me gradually, and in that manner, we can discuss the situation with him in a composed way. I don't wish to impose or rush him into living with me immediately, but it will be necessary eventually, Clara. I simply request your assistance in this journey." Clara nodded slowly, recognizing that, despite the pain, this was the most prudent path forward. "If it means she must depart with you, then I will come to terms with it. My only wish is that you don't completely distance him from me." "I won't do it," Santiago assured. "I promise you that you will always be a part of his life, but I must reclaim my son. These years without him have been unbearable. Time is of the essence." While facing challenges ahead could be daunting, their dedication to Miguel's well-being remained unwavering, even at the cost of their own happiness. "Then we will begin like this," Clara finally declared. Santiago appreciated Clara's understanding and generosity as he agreed to let him get to know her, but he urged caution. He didn't want anything to jeopardize their connection. Love played a significant role in his decision to step back into Miguel's life, a matter he held in high regard. "Thank you, Clara," he said. "I assure you we will approach this the right way. I wish to spare him from any further pain." The dialogue concluded with a poignant sense of relief. Both understood that Miguel's destiny hinged on a transformation in his life. As Santiago stepped out of the cabin that afternoon, his thoughts swirled with uncertainty and inquiry, yet he felt a glimmer of hope knowing he had embarked on the journey to reclaim his son. The forthcoming task of revealing the truth to Miguel loomed ahead, promising to be an even greater hurdle. Driving away in his car, he held on to his resolve, even as the road stretched on before him. Upon discovering that Miguel was alive, her life was set on a course that promised to be both unexpected and perilous. The journey toward the truth had only just commenced, and Santiago understood that every move he made drew him nearer to a confrontation with his past and with Isabella. Yet, regardless of the outcome, he was resolute in his commitment to set things right. The days that followed unfolded with a blend of unease and a facade of tranquility. Santiago kept visiting Clara and Miguel, adhering to their arrangement, as he sought to gradually weave himself into the fabric of the boy's life. Miguel, despite being unaware of the complete story, started to embrace Santiago as a familiar presence in his surroundings. The afternoons drifted by in a serene manner, as the young boy engaged with his wooden blocks or absorbed the tales Clara shared before bedtime. Yet, beneath the calm surface of the cabin, Santiago found his thoughts repeatedly circling back to his wife, Isabella. She remained unaware of Miguel's arrival, and he understood that this secret was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. Santiago dreaded the impending moment of confrontation with her. He was acutely aware that Isabella would not take the news well, not just due to the revelation of her son's survival, but also because of the implications it held for her reputation and standing in society. One afternoon, following a notably subdued visit with Miguel, Santiago resolved that he could no longer delay the inevitable encounter. As he made his way home, thoughts swirled in his mind about how to approach the delicate topic with Isabella. He anticipated her negative reaction, yet he was unaware of the extent of the deceptions he was about to reveal. Upon reaching his mansion, he found Isabella in the living room, a glass of wine in hand, casually flipping through a fashion magazine, lost in her own world. Upon his arrival, a fleeting smile crossed his face, yet it lacked warmth, reminiscent of the countless occasions Santiago had witnessed at gatherings aimed at those he found uninteresting. "How was it today?" she inquired, her gaze fixed on the shiny paper. "You've been outdoors quite a bit lately." Santiago sensed a tightness in his throat. He had practiced the words in his mind throughout the journey, yet now, facing her, it felt far from straightforward. Still, he understood the importance of being forthright. He knew there was no way to cushion the blow of his words. "We need to talk, Isabella," he stated, striving to keep his composure. Isabella raised her gaze gradually, sensing the gravity in his tone. He furrowed his brow just a touch, yet kept his demeanor steady. She was accustomed to being in control, seldom feeling daunted. "Of course, what's on your mind?" he replied, setting the magazine down and taking another sip of his wine. Santiago edged nearer to her, his mind racing for the perfect phrase. It was as if he were poised on the brink of a precarious balance. "I found Miguel." The weight of those words hung in the air, freezing time in the room. For a fleeting instant, Isabella's expression turned steely, but she quickly reverted to her familiar demeanor, as if Santiago's statement had flown over her head. "How do you say?" he inquired with a nervous chuckle. "Don't joke about that, Santiago. Are you aware of what happened with Miguel?" "I'm not joking, Isabella," he interjected, his tone leaving no space for uncertainty. "I found it. Or rather, I discovered him cohabiting with another woman." Isabella held her silence, her gaze fixed on him. His eyes reflected disbelief, yet there was an additional layer, something Santiago had not perceived previously. It felt as though he was grappling with not just the shock of her revelation, but also with a truth he had buried deep within himself. "Miguel is alive, Isabella," Santiago pressed on. "We conducted a DNA test. It's definitely him. There's no question about it. Our son has been alive all this time." Isabella's expression turned to stone, her eyes locked onto Santiago. For a long moment, silence enveloped them, broken only by the soft chime of the wine glass as his shaking hand set it down on the table. "That's impossible," he whispered at last, yet the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. His voice held no real surprise, only a hint of denial. "No, it's not," Santiago said, taking another step. "And you know it. I need you to be honest with me, Isabella. What truly happened to Miguel? What actions did you take?" Isabella met his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, Santiago detected a glimmer of fear in her eyes, not the fear that arises from a tangible danger, but the dread of having her deepest secrets exposed. He sensed that his own response had been off, and now, more than ever, he craved clarity. "What are you suggesting, Santiago?" she replied, her voice starting to take on a sharper edge. "That I played a role in Miguel's disappearance? That's ridiculous." Yet, Santiago remained unconvinced. The tension in Isabella's voice was unmistakable, and as she started to unravel the mystery, she realized there was no turning back until she uncovered the entire truth. "I need you to tell me how our son vanished without a trace," he insisted, his tone resolute, "and how he could reappear years later, only for me to learn about it from someone else. Isabella, reveal the truth to me. What did you do?" The silence that hung in the air was suffocating. Isabella pressed her lips together, visibly searching for an escape, a means to flee from the confrontation. Yet, Santiago had resolved to no longer allow her to dodge the truth. At last, with a deep sigh laced with frustration and repressed anger, Isabella rose from her seat and approached the window, deliberately turning her back to him. For a few moments, only the sound of her strained breathing filled the air, as if she were engaged in an internal struggle. I couldn't handle him, Santiago. His voice eventually broke the silence, low and tinged with resentment. Miguel was an unexpected twist in our story. We had crafted a flawless existence, and then, in an instant, everything shifted with his arrival. I found it unbearable. Everything was falling apart. Santiago sensed the world disintegrating around him as Isabella's words poured forth. His wife, the woman with whom he had crafted a life, was revealing something unimaginable. "Did you really leave him behind?" he murmured, struggling to grasp the weight of the revelation. "You sacrificed our son for your precious image?" Isabella faced him, her eyes now devoid of fear, replaced instead by a chilling detachment. "Yes," he replied firmly, "I did it for us, Santiago. I did it for our life, for everything we had built. I wasn't going to let a child ruin what we had sacrificed so much for, and I never thought you would discover him." Santiago's heart pulsed with uncontainable rage. Isabella's words cut deep, each one a piercing blow, until her fury erupted. "You're a monster," he snarled, moving closer. "You left our son, our own flesh and blood, just to safeguard your precious reputation. It's hard to fathom what's unfolding." Isabella regarded him with a blend of contempt and defiance. "Go ahead, Santiago, but know that nothing will shift because of your actions. Having taken that step, the burden now rests with you, just as it has with me." Santiago was overwhelmed by a surge of nausea, unable to endure another moment in her presence. He turned away and exited the house, his heart shattered and his thoughts in disarray. With the truth now revealed, there was no way to reverse the course of events. His life had crumbled, and the sole conviction that remained was his determination to reclaim Miguel and escape Isabella for good. Santiago stepped out of the house, feeling as though the very air weighed him down. With every step, a weight pressed down upon him, more burdensome than the one before. Isabella's revelation had shattered him, and the resonance of her words lingered relentlessly in his thoughts. "I did it for us, I did it for our life." How could he have been so convinced all those years that she shared his anguish over Miguel's disappearance? How had he failed to see the truth? He paused in the garden, inhaling deeply to quell his rising anger. He understood that confronting Isabella was merely the first step. Now, his attention needed to shift to what truly mattered, his son. Miguel was alive, and nothing and no one, not even Isabella, could stand in his way. I wouldn't squander another moment. Fueled by that fresh resolve, Santiago pulled out his phone and called Clara. I had to see her. I had to be near Miguel. The phone rang multiple times before Clara picked up, her voice tinged with concern. "Santiago, is everything all right?" he inquired, sensing the unease in her quietness. "We need to discuss something," he stated, his tone sharper than he meant. "I just encountered Isabella. I require your attention." A momentary silence lingered on the line before Clara responded. "Very well. Come to the cabin," he said gently, sensing that Santiago was teetering on the edge of an emotional collapse. Without hesitation, Santiago climbed into his car and sped toward the cabin, his heart racing in his chest. Even though a portion of his anger had diminished after departing from the mansion, the underlying pain remained, urging him to find clarity before acting on impulse. Upon reaching the cabin, he found Clara already at the door. He held Miguel in his arms, but noticing Santiago's troubled expression, he gently set him down to play nearby, offering a look brimming with concern as he greeted him. Santiago stepped out of the car at a leisurely pace, but the sight of his son darting around the small garden made his heart plummet once more. Miguel remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil surrounding them. "Santiago!" Clara called out as he drew near. "What happened?" Santiago gazed at her, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, yet he understood the urgency to share the truth. Isabella started to speak, her voice tight with tension. She was aware of it. "From the very start, I was aware of it all. It was she who left Miguel behind. Clara stepped back, taken aback by the revelation. I never envisioned Isabella being so deeply entangled in this. My thoughts had toyed with the idea of something unusual regarding Miguel's disappearance, but hearing the truth from Santiago was a shocking revelation. It just can't be. Clara whispered, covering her mouth in disbelief. Did she leave him behind? Santiago nodded, his teeth clenched as he fought to rein in the surge of emotions within him. She did it for her own sake, to safeguard her precious image. He spat, the anger surging through him once more. He never had any regard for Miguel. She walked away from him, believing he would destroy her life, and now she is prepared to carry on with her deception as if nothing had transpired. Clara, still reeling, leaned against the door frame, absorbing everything Santiago had just revealed. For a brief moment, she was engulfed by the gravity of the situation. Miguel had been left behind by his own mother, and she had been caring for him all along, unaware of the truth. Santiago, he said, his voice quivering, what are you going to do now? Santiago glanced at Miguel, who remained blissfully engaged in play on the grass, then turned his gaze back to Clara. The solution appeared straightforward, yet it was laden with complexities. I will take him, he declared at last. Miguel is my son, and I cannot permit him to remain in Isabella's shadow any longer. She never desired him, Clara. She never held love for him. I cannot keep sharing my life with someone who is capable of forsaking their own child. Yet, I desire to approach this correctly. Clara cast her gaze downward, aware that this moment was inevitable. Even though she recognized Santiago's truth, a profound sorrow enveloped her at the prospect of losing Miguel. For 2 years, he had nurtured him as if he were his own, and while he recognized that Santiago had his best interests at heart, the emptiness left behind would be insurmountable. I understand, Clara replied, her voice trembling, but please, Santiago, don't take him away from me so soon. He loves me. I am everything you understand. Santiago nodded, touched by Clara's honesty. She recognized the challenge it posed for her to embrace all of this, and in spite of her suffering, she felt profound appreciation for what she had accomplished for Miguel. Clara had been his savior, his refuge in a world that had abandoned him. I don't want to keep you out of his life, Clara, he said, his voice gentle. You have been his mother all this time, and Miguel couldn't have taken better care of him. But now I require your presence alongside me. It's essential for him to recognize me as his father, so we can embark on the journey of creating a new life together. Clara nodded slowly, suppressing her tears. I understood that I had to make a decision. Miguel needed to know his father, and it wouldn't be fair to hold that back. Despite the pain it caused me, the priority had to be Miguel's happiness. I will do what is best for him, he declared with unwavering resolve. But I ask you one thing, Santiago. Promise me you'll never take him away from me entirely. Santiago gazed at her with deep appreciation. I assure you, he said earnestly. You will forever hold a place in his life, Clara. I will always remember the kindness you showed to both him and me. Clara offered him a faint smile, yet her sorrow was unmistakable. As she gazed at Miguel, she understood that her moments with him were fleeting. Yet he found solace in the thought that he would finally be with his true father, where he would feel safe. Thank you, he murmured softly. It's all I can hope for. Santiago moved closer to Clara and embraced her, a gesture imbued with respect and appreciation. They both cherished the same child, and despite their divergent paths, they understood that their hearts were intertwined in their wish for Miguel to lead a fulfilling and joyful life. Tomorrow we will begin organizing everything, Santiago remarked as he stepped back. We will take our time, just as we discussed. I want to ensure this isn't a distressing experience for him. Clara nodded once more, aware that the conclusion was approaching, yet finding solace in the journey. Miguel was about to embark on a journey of understanding, discovering the love of his father as he grew. As Santiago bid farewell and drove off, Clara felt the weight of a chapter closing in her life. Soon, Miguel would step out from her watchful gaze, yet he would forever remain a cherished part of her heart. As she observed the little boy frolicking in the garden, a soothing thought enveloped her. She had made the right choice, and that, in some manner, brought her a sense of tranquility. The days that ensued after Santiago and Clara's decision to embrace the change were oddly serene. Miguel, unaware of the reality, regarded Santiago as just another friend, a significant presence gradually finding a deeper space in his heart. Meanwhile, Santiago was intent on using every visit to deepen the connection with his son. Yet, this tranquility was destined to be fleeting. One morning, as Santiago sat in his office poring over work documents, an unexpected call from his lawyer broke the silence. The urgency in the voice on the other end sent a jolt through Santiago. "Santiago, we have a problem. Isabella has filed a legal request for full custody of Miguel." The news hit Santiago like a thunderclap. He remained quiet, grappling with the weight of what he had just learned. Isabella was pursuing custody of Miguel. After all she had done, after turning her back on her own son, she now dared to attempt to reclaim him. "How can this be?" he inquired, his tone laced with incredulity and fury. "She was the one who left him behind." "We understand that," her attorney replied, "but Isabella wields influence and has connections." He contends that it was a mere misunderstanding, emphasizing his emotional vulnerability at the time and his subsequent reflection on the error. His legal team intends to challenge your capability as a father, pointing out that Miguel has primarily been raised by Clara rather than you. Santiago clenched his jaw, the fury within him intensifying. He understood that Isabella would go to great lengths to safeguard her reputation, and this was her method of attempting to steer the story. It wasn't about Miguel, it had never been about him. It was a calculated decision. "What are our next steps?" he inquired, striving to maintain his composure, even as a storm brewed within him. "I will start preparing the defense, but I need Clara to agree to testify for you," the lawyer replied. "She has been Miguel's closest ally, and her testimony will be crucial in demonstrating that Isabella is not prioritizing the child's welfare." Santiago nodded, fully aware that urging Clara to engage in a legal struggle would bring her distress. She had endured so much already, and the last thing he wished was to thrust her into an even tougher predicament. Yet, I found myself with no alternative. If she chose not to resist, Isabella might emerge victorious. Following the call, Santiago wasted no time and headed straight to Clara's cabin. He had to articulate the unfolding situation and brace himself for the impending events. When he arrived, Clara welcomed him with a gentle smile. Yet, Santiago could perceive in her gaze that she was already aware that something was amiss. "Santiago, what's going on?" Clara inquired, setting down the cloth she had been using to wipe the table. "It's Isabella," Santiago replied, letting out a heavy sigh. "He is pursuing full custody of Miguel. He intends to take our son away from me." Clara was momentarily taken aback. She understood that Isabella was not a good person, yet she never envisioned that she would resort to such actions. "How can this be happening?" she inquired. "Despite all his actions, he is leveraging his power and influence to twist the narrative," Santiago clarified. "She is portraying herself as the regretful mother who erred, now seeking to reclaim her son, while her legal team contends that my bond with Miguel is weak because he has been with you more than with me." Clara sensed the world crumbling around her. While she had come to terms with the notion that Miguel would eventually reside with Santiago, the thought of Isabella attempting to claim him had never crossed her mind. The very idea that this woman could influence Miguel's destiny engulfed her in dread. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice quivering. Santiago stepped closer, grasping her hands with conviction. "I need you to testify for me," he said with earnest intensity. "You have been by Miguel's side all these years, the one who has nurtured and safeguarded him. If anyone understands what he truly needs, it's you. If you can share your experience, if you can reveal the truth of what transpired, we might just have a chance to put an end to Isabella. Clara gazed into his eyes, hoping to find a hint that this was merely a nightmare, yet deep down, she understood it was all too real. Santiago was urging her to step into danger, but her resolve was for Miguel's benefit. Despite the pain it caused her, she was prepared to sacrifice anything to shield the boy she cherished. "I will," he declared at last, his voice filled with conviction. "I will do everything necessary to safeguard Miguel. I won't allow that woman to take him away." Santiago breathed a sigh of relief, filled with deep appreciation for Clara. He knew how difficult it was for her, but together they would fight to make sure Miguel was safe. "Thank you," he murmured, squeezing her hands firmly. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Clara smiled sadly, although determination shone in her eyes. "I just want Miguel to be okay," she said softly. "That's all that matters." Preparations for the hearing unfolded swiftly. Santiago and his lawyer dedicated themselves to assembling evidence that would demonstrate Isabella's abandonment, while Clara readied herself to share her experiences of caring for Miguel over the years. As the day of the hearing drew nearer, the tension mounted, yet Santiago and Clara stood resolute in their shared purpose. The day of the hearing dawned, and Santiago, flanked by his lawyer and Clara, stepped into the courtroom. The weight of the situation pressed heavily upon him, yet he was resolute in his determination to battle fiercely. As the judge entered and took his seat, Santiago's heart raced in anticipation. Isabella sat across the room, her expression unreadable, surrounded by a team of lawyers. Yet, Santiago remained undaunted. As the hearing commenced, it quickly became Clara's moment to speak. With a mix of anxiety and determination, he approached the stand. Her gaze scanned the room for Santiago, who met her with an encouraging glance. Steeling herself, Clara lifted her chin and began to share her narrative. How he had discovered Miguel, how he had nurtured him as if he were his own child, and how he had endeavored to make the right choices consistently. "This boy," Clara said with tears glistening in her eyes, "I love him as if he were my own, yet I always understood he had the right to know his true father. Santiago is here for his son. I have witnessed it with Miguel. She holds a profound love for him and desires nothing but the best for his future." The judge paid close attention as Isabella's attorneys tried to undermine Clara, probing into her capability to provide for Miguel. Clara remained resolute, standing up for the truth she believed in, that Isabella had never truly loved her son, and that only Santiago had genuinely cared for her well-being. As she concluded her testimony, Santiago was overwhelmed with gratitude. Clara had shown a strength beyond his expectations, and her words were pivotal in securing their victory. As Clara settled back into her seat, Santiago cast a nervous glance at the judge, his heart racing in anticipation of the final verdict. Everything hinged on the words that would follow. The stillness in the courtroom was palpable. Santiago, fists tightly clenched on his knees, fixed his gaze on the judge, anticipating the verdict that would alter his son's future. Clara, beside him, maintained a composed demeanor, though her hands betrayed her with a slight tremor. In stark contrast, Isabella sat unmoved, exuding an air of confidence, as if defeat was an impossibility, relying on her authority and sway to secure her desired outcome. The judge, a middle-aged man with a serious demeanor, perused the documents laid out before him, scrutinizing each detail meticulously. After what felt like an eternity, he raised his gaze, his firm eyes surveying everyone in the room. "I have considered both sides of the case," he began, his voice resonating with authority. "After carefully considering all the evidence and testimony provided, it becomes evident that the paramount concern is the welfare of the child, Miguel. The choices made by the parents in the past have significantly influenced their lives, and we must acknowledge that." Santiago felt his breath catch. The pivotal moment was approaching. The biological mother, Mrs. Isabella, has contended that she erred and is now striving to amend her past decision, the judge elaborated. "Nevertheless, I must acknowledge the gravity of his actions. Abandoning a child is a grave act that cannot be easily justified, and in this instance, the evidence clearly indicates that Mr. Santiago is the father who has demonstrated the most dedication to his child's welfare. Isabella frowned, yet chose to remain silent. Santiago clenched his hands, bracing himself for the words that would determine his son's destiny. Therefore, the judge stated, fixing his gaze on Santiago, I hereby grant full custody of Miguel to Mr. Santiago. Additionally, Ms. Isabella will be unable to pursue custody in the future unless there is a comprehensive examination of the case. The child's well-being should always come first, and I firmly believe that this is the optimal outcome for Miguel. The judge's words enveloped Santiago in a warm embrace of relief. He sensed a tremendous burden ease from his shoulders. Miguel was secure. Isabella was unable to remove it from him. Santiago exhaled a breath he hadn't known he was holding. As he turned to Clara, he noticed the tears glistening in her eyes, accompanied by a smile that radiated relief and gratitude. Isabella, for her part, held a stoic expression. He remained silent, avoiding any confrontation. Rising from his seat, he gathered his belongings and, without casting a glance at Santiago or Clara, exited the room alongside his team of lawyers. The quietness of his defeat was unmistakable. Santiago understood that she would always hold a grudge against him for confronting her and emerging victorious. Yet, in that instant, everything else faded into insignificance. Nothing else held significance, it was all about Miguel. As the hearing drew to a close, Santiago and Clara exited the courtroom side by side. The sun blazed in the sky, radiating warmth and light, as though the cosmos itself was joining in the jubilation of Santiago's triumph. They paused on the staircase of the building, and Santiago, overwhelmed with feeling, embraced Clara with fervor. We did it, Santiago whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. We accomplished it, Clara. Clara embraced him tightly, tears streaming down her face, yet they were tears of relief. I was certain this was the correct conclusion. Miguel would be with his father, in a secure home, yet he understood that their connection would remain unshaken. Miguel is fortunate to have you, Clara remarked, her smile breaking through the tears that glistened in her eyes. He will be all right. Santiago acknowledged with a nod, fully aware that Clara had a point. He had long feared this moment, haunted by the thought that his son might be lost to him forever. Yet, in that moment, he realized they had the potential to create a fresh beginning side by side. Clara, I truly hope you will remain a significant part of her life, Santiago expressed earnestly. Miguel has deep feelings for you, and I truly hope you won't walk away from him. Throughout the years, you have played the role of his mother, and your significance in his life will forever remain. Clara beamed, sensing a burden ease from her heart. Despite her fears of losing Miguel, she realized that he would forever remain a part of her life, and that was enough for her. I appreciate it, Santiago, he responded. That's everything I could hope for. The days following the hearing marked a time of adjustment for Santiago and Miguel. Gradually, Santiago welcomed his son into his everyday routine, making regular trips to Clara's cabin to facilitate a seamless transition. Miguel, initially perplexed by the shifts in his life, gradually embraced the notion that Santiago was his father, and as time passed, he effortlessly started to refer to him as Dad. Clara remained an unwavering figure in Miguel's life. Santiago honored his commitment, ensuring she could always catch a glimpse of him, and together they created a unique bond, connected by their affection for the same child. As they strolled through the nearby park, Santiago's gaze fell upon Miguel, joyfully darting across the grass, and then shifted to Clara, who observed him with a gentle smile gracing her lips. In that instant, he encountered a tranquility he hadn't known for years. In the face of adversity, heartache, and challenges, they found themselves in a moment where hope for the future shone brightly. We've faced many trials, Clara, Santiago remarked with a wistful smile, but finally, we find ourselves at peace. Clara met his gaze and nodded, aware that while challenges still lay ahead, they had triumphed over the greatest hurdle. Miguel is content, she responded, that's what truly counts. Santiago nodded, casting a glance at his son. At last, he sensed that he had regained something he believed was gone for good. And we all shall be, Santiago concluded. Months later, Santiago and Miguel shared the family home, but the atmosphere had shifted significantly. Isabella's presence had faded from their existence. Clara, despite residing in her cabin, remained an essential aspect of her everyday existence. Santiago had come to understand that families often defied expectations, they were crafted through love, dedication, and honesty. Despite the long and challenging journey, Miguel, Santiago, and Clara had discovered their rightful place in the world, united as one.